Hello everyone. So today I want to talk about binding. A lot of people are using binding right now as an alternative to elastic for face masks. And so I want to talk a little bit about the different types of binding, what they're used for, and how you can make them yourself or what to expect if you are purchasing binding. So there are a few different types of binding. There are generally double fold bindings, which are folded up into a piece that looks like this. And there are single fold bindings. So if you are purchasing these already pre-packaged, you are going to find that the single fold is going to be a strip that is just folded in half. So this in particular is a 2 1/4 inch strip that has been folded in half, and this is to be sewn onto a quilt or to be used with a single fold. You may also find double fold binding. Double fold binding is a binding that has been, the raw edges are pressed in and the binding is pressed in half. So when you purchase it, it is going to be wrapped around a piece of cardboard just like this. And when you open it up, you are going to find that it's been folded. It's a little bit harder to see on this black piece right here, but this also has the fold where the edges have been folded in and then into the center. So when you're purchasing binding already pre-made, it's either going to be the option of the single fold or the double fold binding. Generally, those are going to be made out of bias. So those are going to be a stretchy strip versus a homemade one. You can make them so that they do not have as much stretch. So generally the ones that you purchase in packages are going to be a bias binding. These are made to easily go around curves, and they're made to go around areas that may not necessarily be perfectly straight. You can make your own binding at home using just regular cross grain strips. That means that they are not cut across the bias and are not going to be as stretchy. So these are really great and really sturdy because they don't have a lot of stretch to them. So depending on the purpose that you're using them for, either one is going to be great. For masks, which a lot of people are making binding to use on masks, the double fold bias strips are great because they do have a little bit of stretch to help conform to tying them on. But the cross grain strips are great as well, and you can certainly make your own. One of my favorite tools for pressing and prepping my binding strips are these sashers. These come in a variety of different sizes depending on the strip that you are trying to do, but you can use them to make single fold binding, or you can use them to make double fold binding. If you are doing a single fold binding, all you're going to do is fold your strip in half with wrong sides together. So these are my wrong sides together. And you're going to insert that into the strip like a belt buckle. So it's going to go in one side over the top, out the other, and your iron is going to go here, and you can push this with your iron, and it is going to fold over your strip as you press. So you won't have to have your hands anywhere near anything. You don't have to worry about burning your fingertips. This is going to sit in place so that you can perfectly press your binding in half. If you are doing the double fold binding, you can still use the sasher in the same way. You're just going to fold your raw edges into the center, and same thing, run it through like a belt buckle. As you pull this through, it's going to fold your edges into the center. So with your iron, you're going to pull this over, and then you'll be able to just press that in half and press it again to make your double fold. So these have been the easiest way for me to press my strips to prepare them if I'm not using a quilt binding attachment. If you are using double fold binding, there are two ways to sew this onto your item. Right now I have a little quilt square, and there are two ways to put this on. You can take your item, place it in the center of your strip, fold over the edge, and you can top stitch through all your layers. So you can actually stitch kind of right next to the fold here, about 1/8 of an inch, maybe less in, and that should catch it top and bottom. If you're a little bit worried that it's not going to catch your top and bottom, what you can do is you can open out this strip and you can sew in the fold where this is going to pull over. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that a little bit so you can see it a little clearly. So right where that indentation of the fold is, you can stitch directly in that fold to make sure that you're going to be stitching this right where it's supposed to fold over to the opposite side of your fabric. So here's a little blue line. You can always mark your stitching line as long as it's with a water-soluble marker or check pencil to make sure that when you fold this over, it's going to be perfect. So you can sew directly in that groove, and then when this folds over, again, you can top stitch this down. You can use a decorative stitch. If you prefer, you can hand sew the back on. A lot of people like hand sewn bindings, and so you can hand sew that as well. So if you are using a double fold, you can either sew it on all at once, or you can open this out, sew into the fold, and then turn it to the wrong side. If you are using a single fold binding, you are just going to line up the raw edge of your fabric with the raw edge of the piece that you're stitching this onto, and you're going to stitch this in place with whatever seam allowance is correct for the size of your binding. If you are using a 2 1/4 inch strip, you're going to stitch this with a 1/4 inch seam. If you're doing a 2 1/2 inch strip, you are going to use a 3/8 inch seam. So depending on how wide your strip is going to determine how big your seam allowance is going to be. So I've stitched just a little section here with a 1/4 inch seam. You're going to press this away from the seam, and you're going to press that onto the wrong side of your fabric. So that's going to come over onto the back here. You can hand sew this, so if you wanted to hand stitch your binding, you can do that, or you can stitch right in the ditch here, and it will catch your backing. When I'm turning my bindings over to the wrong side, I like to use a little bit of fabric glue from a glue stick, and just put a little bit of that on the seam, and that's going to perfectly hold my binding in place so that when I stitch this, it's going to be nice and secure and I don't have to worry about the back moving. Currently, my favorite way to attach binding is using the quilt binder. So if you have access to a quilt binder, it's a great resource to be able to make quick, easy binding because you don't actually have to do any pressing. It's going to fold everything over as you are stitching. So as you feed your straight strip into the quilt binder, and this is a 1 3/4 inch strip, when it gets down to the little opening here right before it hits your needle, it is going to fold the raw edges under. So you can see here, the top and the bottom, the raw edges are folded under, and it is going to stitch this top and bottom at the same time. So you can sew multiple strips together so that you have a full set of whatever length that you need. You can sew all your strips together first. It will still feed through the quilt binder. It still will stitch through the quilt binder. For making masks, I've been cutting 40-inch strips and marking out kind of roughly in the center of them so I know where to place my mask, and I've been stitching the strips, stopping when I get to that point, inserting the mask in the middle, and continuing. Because you can sew just your strips here, so if you were looking to just make some straps or ties, you can use this without having any other fabric in between. But if you were going to sew this onto an item, your item's going to get slipped into the opening here. And as this feeds through, it's going to stitch it on front and back. So there is stitched on the front, and it's also attached on the back. So it is going to do 2 pieces at once. This is the Husqvarna Viking quilt binder. They also make one for the FOF machines. The major difference is going to be the foot and how it fits on your machine. But if you have access to one of these, it's a great resource and it makes quick, easy binding without having to do any pressing or any folding. Hopefully this video answered a lot of your questions about quilt bindings and about binding in general, and how you can distinguish between the different types of binding and how you attach those bindings. There are always ways, if you don't have access to a lot of these tools, these can always just be pressed as they are. You just find the center, press your raw edges into the center, and then press that in half and press again, and you're ready to go. So these can be made without having any kind of tools accessible to you, but if you do, there are a lot of things out there that can definitely make this go a lot faster. If you have any questions, please let us know. You can send us an email, you can comment on any of these videos. Any questions you have, feel free to ask.